June 10, 1943, Stockton War Relocation Center, California. The barracks smelled of cedar wood and machine oil. A line of Japanese POWs stood in silence near a long cinder-block building with two steel chimneys and a humming noise behind the doors. Corporal Yuki Takamura shifted his boots on the gravel, arms folded tight against the early morning chill. The sound inside was unnatural, mechanical, rhythmic. He had heard artillery and diesel engines and even B-17s warming up on Tinian, but this wasn't that. It was faster, lighter, like wind trapped in a wire. Beside him, Sergeant Daisuke Morita leaned in. "I don't like that sound," he muttered in Japanese. "It sounds like bone being ground into powder." Takamura didn't answer. He was watching the guard, a tall, corn-fed American kid with freckles and a clipboard, who waved each prisoner forward with a casualness that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd processed an enemy with blood still under his fingernails. And then the door opened. Steam spilled out onto the gravel like fog, and the noise grew louder. Click, click, buzz. The smell followed not of powder or sweat but something strange, soapy, clean, like cotton dipped in mint. "Next group," the guard called without looking up. Takamura stepped forward. He had spent 3 years in the jungles of Burma cutting soldiers, hair with steel scissors sharpened on whetstones. He had shaved officers with a straight razor and cold water drawn from riverbanks. What he saw inside the American camp changed everything. The room wasn't large, maybe the size of a small bathhouse, but it was warm, filled with quiet humming and a cloud of rising steam. 4 chairs sat lined against the back wall, each occupied by a Japanese prisoner seated stiffly, necks draped in crisp white towels. In front of them stood 4 American barbers, real barbers, wearing smocks, holding chrome machines that buzzed like angry wasps in their hands. Electric clippers. Takamura's eyes locked on the nearest one as it danced through a prisoner's thick hair, shearing through weeks of jungle growth in seconds. No blade sharpening, no hand-straining scissors, no dragging of dull razors across sweaty skin, just buzz, and the hair fell like water. Across the room, one of the barbers wrung out a steaming white towel and draped it gently across a prisoner's face. The man flinched and then froze. His shoulders slumped, not from fear, from relief. The hot towel didn't burn, it soothed. Takamura couldn't breathe for a moment. He whispered, "They shave them like guests." Morita said nothing. His eyes were wide. Back in Burma, Takamura's last haircut had taken 17 minutes with tools so rusted he'd soaked them in boiled leaves for 2 hours. His last shave had drawn blood. Not a nick, blood. On Okinawa, the officers still used swords. But here in a prison camp, the enemy was being shaved by a machine, and the men wielding it weren't soldiers. They were smiling, talking about baseball scores, asking how long it had been since the last haircut. One American barber spoke slowly, with a drawl, as he massaged lather into a prisoner's jawline. "You boys get scruffy out there in the Pacific, huh?" The Japanese man blinked at him. He didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Not cruel, not mocking. Ordinary. When it was Takamura's turn, he sat in the chair and tried not to shake. The leather was soft, the towel was warm, and the man behind him, probably no older than 23, moved with the relaxed precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. The clippers touched his scalp and buzzed. He expected pain. He expected the heat of the blade, the sharp sting of a mistake. But the machine was fast and cold, gliding through his hair like it wasn't even trying. The American didn't speak. He worked. He hummed a tune Takamura didn't know. And when the towel came thick, hot, wet with eucalyptus oil, Takamura closed his eyes. He felt the months of war evaporate into that steam. The lice, the crawling, the sweat. Gone. No blade, just a gentle drag of safety steel across his cheek, following the grain. He hadn't been shaved like this even at home. Later, back in the barracks, the other barbers among the prisoners huddled in stunned silence. They whispered the details. Each chair had a motor beneath it, humming like a tank but gentle. The towels weren't boiled rags. They came from real linen rolls, soft as cloud. The Americans used cream that foamed without needing soap. Some said it smelled like mint. Morita leaned in. "Did you see how fast the hair came off?" Takamura nodded. "In 10 minutes they did what takes us 40. And they were smiling, as if it was nothing. He could not stop thinking about the tools, the machines, the towels. He had learned to cut hair with his grandfather's shears, passed down since the Taisho era. The Americans had disposable razors in bulk, clippers that didn't need sharpening, bottles of disinfectant with labels in blue and red. They had brought barbershop civilization to a prison. To the enemy. He whispered, "This is not a camp, this is something else." The guards didn't threaten, they pointed, directed. The prisoners walked to the chair, got shaved, and walked back in silence. It was efficient, streamlined. More than that, it was a message. "We can do this for you, even though you're the enemy. Imagine what we do for our own." That night Takamura lay awake staring at the wooden beams above his bunk. He touched his cheek. Smooth, no nicks, no sting. The war had taught him pain and hardship. It had shown him death in colors no man should see. But today, in a place he thought would strip his humanity, he had been offered something else. Precision. Power. Comfort. And in that moment, he realized the Americans weren't just fighting with bombs and bullets. They were fighting with systems. The second week in camp brought more routines: morning roll call, kitchen duty, mailroom sorting, but it was the Wednesday shaves that stood out. By then, the barbers among the prisoners, Takamura, Morita, and a handful of others from Kyushu and Osaka, had watched 6 sessions unfold. 30 to 40 men every morning, one after another. The same process: chairs, capes, clippers, lather, towel, shave. Always clean, always fast, always precise. Takamura couldn't stop thinking about the machines, the sound of them, the ease of them. The contrast to his father's old shop in Aomori, where every haircut had required boiling water, a basin, a blade stropped 100 times, and towels hung from iron hooks above the wood stove. In the barracks, the other Japanese prisoners still cut each other's hair the old way, on crate boxes, with the same dull scissors and razors that bit deep if your hand shook. But after each American session, the freshly clipped men came back different, not softer, not weak, just aware. One morning, Corporal Matsumoto, who had once served as a barber for an artillery regiment in Manchuria, sat with Takamura outside the laundry detail. "You notice how their hands move?" he asked quietly. Takamura nodded. "Fast but careful, they don't nick not once." "And their razors?" Matsumoto shook his head. "How many do they have?" "I counted 18. In a camp." Matsumoto stared down at his palms. "I carried one blade through 4 campaigns, honed it on concrete when I had to." Takamura said nothing. He was remembering the scent again, the shaving cream, the peppermint oil in the towels, the clean sting of alcohol after the shave. Americans even sprayed it from glass bottles, as if hygiene was something casual, not sacred. By the 3rd week, a quiet shift began. The Americans invited the Japanese barbers to observe, not command, not supervise, just watch. It wasn't an order. The guard, Sergeant Everett, a mild-mannered man with sunburned skin and a permanent smirk, simply pointed to a sign on the barbershop door: "Volunteers welcome to observe. Respect required. No exceptions." Takamura hesitated. Morita didn't. By Thursday, he stood behind the 4th chair, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching an American with tattoos and glasses run the clippers over a prisoner's scalp. The lines were clean, no tugging, no readjusting. The blade seemed to float. "Can I ask what brand that is?" Morita said in hesitant English. The barber smiled. "Oster Model 76, got him last fall." Morita blinked. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood Oster. A name, a brand, a machine with a number. It meant mass production. It meant there were thousands more. By mid-July, they were asked to try. One of the American barbers stepped aside and handed the clippers to Takamura. "Wanna give it a go?" he asked, tilting his head. "It's not that different from shears, just quicker." Takamura held the handle. It was heavier than it looked, warm from use. He switched it on. The vibration shot through his wrist and up his arm, surprising him. The sound was electric, alive. He touched the blade to the prisoner's scalp. The hair fell away like magic. He didn't speak for the rest of the session. That night, Morita sat beside him, a tin cup of water resting between his hands. "They gave me shaving cream today," he said. "From a can, you shake it, it foams on its own." Takamura stared at him. "A machine inside a can," Morita whispered. "You don't even need a brush." They were quiet for a long time. Then Morita asked the question no one had yet dared to say aloud. "How does a country make machines to fight and shave this well?" The next morning, a letter arrived from another camp. Not from home, not from Tokyo, from Arkansas. The Red Cross had arranged for barbers across camps to exchange notes. A single envelope typed inside. Questions. What kind of lather do they use? Do the guards rotate who cuts hair? Do they have sterilizing fluid for every blade? Are towels steamed or soaked? Morita read it aloud, then folded it slowly. "They think this is standard," he muttered, "that every American camp has these things." Takamura shook his head. "I think it is." In August, new supplies arrived. Boxes of clippers, disposable razors, mirror panels, more chairs. It wasn't for the Americans. It was for the Japanese. "Use it," Sergeant Everett said. "We want you cutting each other's hair in camp. Keep it clean, organized, professional." Takamura ran his fingers over the box of clippers. They were real, stamped with serial numbers, still oiled from the factory. Morita touched the side of the case and whispered, "They gave us the weapons." Takamura looked at him. "No, they gave us the blueprint." By the end of the month, the camp had 3 operating barbershops, all run by prisoners. They issued appointments, kept rosters, trained new assistants. And every day, a different man stood at the sink, wringing out steaming towels from kettles placed on electric burners. Some prisoners wept the first time they felt the heat of one on their faces, not because it burned, but because it reminded them of home, of civility, of rituals older than war. One prisoner, Fujikawa, had never cut hair before the war. He had been a chemistry student, but he took to the clippers quickly. He began drawing diagrams, how to break the machine down, how to clean the motor, how to fix the blade housing. He called the Americans over and asked questions. They showed him, explained the coil, the magnet, the contacts. Within a week, he had tuned 2 of the slower clippers back to full speed. By September, he built a 3rd from spare parts. Takamura watched him run it. The motor purred, the teeth gleamed. "I never saw something like this in the army," Fujikawa said. Morita laughed. "Of course not, we were soldiers, they were a civilization." The language changed too. No longer clipper or razor, now denki kamisari, electric razor. No longer prison barbershop, now Sudokuten Shitsure Joe, Stockton grooming station. It sounded professional, respectable. Even as prisoners, they were rebuilding something. But it didn't stop there. One morning, Morita woke early and noticed something strange. The guards had placed magazines on the benches. Not propaganda, not military. Barber Life, Modern Hygiene, American Salon Weekly. Full-color ads, close-ups of clippers, chrome-plated scissors, smiling men in white coats, shops with checkered floors and glass counters. He flipped through one slowly, then faster. Takamura leaned over his shoulder and stared. There were ads for talcum powder, aftershave, even powdered gloves. They have industries for this, Takamura said. Whole systems, magazines, factories, deliveries. Morita nodded. We had honor, they had distribution. That night neither of them slept. The war they had been fighting suddenly felt bigger than islands and soldiers. It was a war of production. A war of comfort. A war of mastery over the small things, not just bombs and bullets, but blades and bristles. And that war, they knew now, had been lost long before Guadalcanal. By early October, the barbershops in Stockton were no longer curiosities. They were institutions, not just for prisoners, for guards too. Every Thursday after mess, a different American soldier entered the third station, the one closest to the rear wall, where a mirror had been bolted beside a plywood shelf lined with brushes, oils, and safety razors, and sat down in Takamura's chair. No rifles in hand, no barked orders, just a nod, a pull of the cape over fatigues, and a quiet, take a little off the top. The first time it happened, the camp watched in silence. An American soldier, in a prisoner's chair, being shaved by a Japanese NCO. The clippers hummed, the towel steamed, the blade slid. Nothing went wrong. When it was done, the guard stood, checked the mirror, nodded once. Then he left. No jokes, no applause, no fear. It happened again the next week, then again, and again. By November, the camp barbers had a rotation chart posted beside the tool cabinet. Both prisoners and guards signed up. Every name was in English and Japanese, written in pencil, side by side. Takamura never got used to the silence between them. The men in uniform never spoke more than a word or two, but they came back, for the clippers, for the towel, for the shave. He didn't know what that meant. Perhaps they were just practical men. Perhaps they had learned to trust their former enemy's hands out of necessity. Or perhaps, and this was harder to admit, they didn't see enemies anymore. Just craftsmen. One rainy afternoon, a visiting officer from the War Department toured the facility. A major, tall, clean-shaven, too clean. His neck showed rash. His jaw bore small scars from shaving against the grain. He paused at the entrance to the barbershop. "Is this the prisoner detail?" he asked. The MP beside him nodded. "They're good." The MP scratched his neck. "Sir, I've stopped shaving at home. I wait for Thursdays now." The major stepped inside. 10 minutes later, he emerged with a white towel around his neck, his face pink from the steam, his cheeks perfectly smooth. He didn't say a word. He returned the next week. In December, packages arrived. Wooden crates. Inside, new chairs. The kind with footrests, chrome bases, and leather cushions stitched in green. On the bottom of each, a brass plate stamped with Chicago Belmont Barber Supply Co. Takamura stared at them like sacred artifacts. "Imported for prisoners," Morita said, running a hand over the stitching. "While back home, we sharpen razors on cement." It was true. Letters from Japan were beginning to arrive. Tattered envelopes with censor markings. News of rationing, of broken cities, of sons drafted too young and factories running out of metal. Tokyo had no time for barbers now. But here in Stockton they were still sending chairs, razors, oils, machines. Morita said, "We lost to this. Not a bomb, not a bullet. A logistics chain that reached into the quietest corners of even its enemy's world." By New Year's, something else changed. Fujikawa, the chemistry student turned barber, created a new station. Not just haircuts, not just shaves. He called it Kansogata Taken, dry grooming. You don't need water, he explained. Just powder, a brush, a scent for men too sick to shave. It was strange, but within a week older prisoners, the ones with malaria scars, weak lungs, trembling hands, started lining up. He brushed their brows, dabbed their necks, applied talc with a circular motion. He never used a blade, never touched a razor, but they walked out straighter. Sometimes dignity didn't need a machine, just hands. In March, a photographer arrived. Civilian clothes, heavy camera, he asked to document the barbershop. No one refused. The camp command had approved it. The man took dozens of photos, prisoners shaving each other, Americans smiling in chairs. A close-up of Fujikawa wiping sweat from a man's brow with the corner of a folded towel. He never spoke, but he watched everything. Watched how the tools moved, how the routines didn't break, how steam rose every morning. Before he left, he showed Morita the contact sheet. Black and white, crisp, framed. "You're not in a war picture," the man said. "You're in a barbershop." And for a moment, they believed him. That spring, Takamura stopped dreaming of battles. He dreamt of his father's old shop in Aomori, of oil lamps and sandals lined outside the door, of the sound of scissors, the scrape of steel, the soft crackle of towel against basin. And he imagined what it would look like rebuilt, with mirrors like the Americans used, with drawers for razors, with clippers that buzzed and never slowed, with towels pulled from steamers, not pots. A barbershop of the future, in a Japan not yet born. One evening in late April, Sergeant Everett pulled Takamura aside. He handed him a folded envelope, typed, government letterhead. Inside was a requisition form. Not for military release. Not for transfer. Not even for discharge. It was for shipping. "Tools," Everett said, "yours." Takamura unfolded the second sheet. 2 sets of clippers, 3 razors, 6 brushes, 4 combs, 1 towel steamer, a foot pump, mirror glass. "You earned it," Everett said. "You'll need it when this is all over." Takamura's voice caught. "For what?" Everett smiled. "For the first customer, wherever you open next." Fujikawa later translated the packing invoice. It had come from Missouri, delivered by rail. Final destination, Nagasaki Prefecture, care of temporary relocation housing, post-war registry. Not prison supplies, business inventory. Pre-cleared, authorized, stamped. Takamura whispered, "They're sending us home with the tools to rebuild." Morita said, "Because they know we'll copy it, improve it, spread it." Fujikawa corrected him, "Because they want us to." By May, word reached them, Germany had fallen. And in the Pacific, something worse was coming. Rumors of firestorms in Tokyo, entire cities vanishing overnight. They didn't yet know the names Hiroshima, Nagasaki, but they knew what defeat smelled like. It wasn't smoke or blood. It was mint on a hot towel. It was the hum of a motor. It was the echo of steel on skin without pain. The day the war ended, there was no gunfire, no announcement, just quiet. Not even the guards spoke. The news came down through whispers, through eyes, through a stillness in the air too unnatural for a camp that had lived off the rhythm of orders and drills and wooden boots on gravel. It was Fujikawa who said it aloud, holding the scrap of paper that passed for the camp bulletin. "Emperor Hirohito has spoken." The men didn't cheer, they didn't cry. They just stood still. Takamura placed his razor gently into the drawer, closed it, and leaned his palms on the counter. He could still hear the hiss of the towel boiler in the corner. Steam coiled upward, oblivious to the shift in history. Behind him, the electric clippers hummed. Someone was finishing a fade on a guard who still hadn't changed expression. Outside, the barbed wire fence hadn't moved. But everything else had. In the weeks that followed, the camp changed subtly. No more drills, no more formations, but the barber shop kept running. Men who had once sworn oaths to die in battle now waited in line for a shave, for a towel, for silence. The Americans began speaking more, joking. They let the Japanese barbers keep the magazines. Some even brought new ones: Modern Mechanics, Popular Science, a Sears catalog. Takamura flipped through it one night, sitting beneath a low bulb that buzzed like the clippers. There were pages of equipment. Steamers, leather strops, electric razors that looked like alien tools. Everything was available, just mail in the form, wait, receive. He traced his finger over a page titled, "The Home Barber's Kit." 3 clippers, folding mirror, 2 razors, oil bottle. $17.85, shipping included. He couldn't imagine that. A family ordering tools like these just because. Not for war, not for scarcity, for comfort. By October, trains began to arrive. Not supply trains, repatriation trains. Car after car of men who had once been pilots, sailors, clerks, laborers, sent back to a country they hadn't seen in 3 years. But they didn't look like soldiers anymore. They were clean. Their hair was sharp. Their beards were gone. Their uniforms pressed. They looked like men going to a job interview. And they had been shaved, not by command, not by regulation, but by the hands of prisoners who'd learned to work machines they once feared. Takamura and Morita were given their crate in early November. It was heavier than expected. Inside, 4 Oster clippers, 1 still factory seal, 3 safety razors, a dozen enameled mugs for lather, 2 full sets of towels, a hot steam kettle, and a folded American flag. No note, no explanation, just the tools. Morita lifted the flag, stared at it, then folded it again. They shave us, then send us home with their machines. Fujikawa said, "They're planting seeds." Takamura just nodded. The day they boarded the train, every barber walked past the shop one last time. They stood silently, each man placing a hand on the worn frame of the door. Not to say goodbye. To remember what had changed them. They had arrived as captives. They left as craftsmen, with tools they never dreamed of touching. When they reached Japan, the country was smoke and rubble. The ports stank of diesel and ash. Tokyo was flattened. Bridges hung like broken teeth over brown rivers. Even the wind felt different, older. But amid the wreckage, people were lining up. Not for weapons. For soap. For scissors. For razors. In Nagasaki, Takamura found a small wooden structure near the edge of the old district. 2 walls had collapsed. The ceiling had gaps, but there was a mirror inside, unbroken. He wiped the glass clean with the hem of his sleeve. Then he opened the crate. He laid out the clippers, the brushes, the towels. And the first man stepped through the door. Hair tangled, beard overgrown, eyes hollow. A survivor. Takamura pointed to the chair. No words, just the gesture. The man sat, the towel went on, the clippers buzzed. And a familiar sound returned to the air. Word spread. Soon there were 3 men waiting, then 5, then 10. No one asked about politics. No one asked about surrender. They asked, "Can you clean me up? Do you still have steam? Do you remember how to do the back fade?" By February 1946, there were 30 barbers across the ruins of Nagasaki, all former POWs. And all of them had learned to shave again in Stockton. They taught apprentices, built chairs from scrap, ordered steel from American depots under Reconstruction aid. They copied manuals they brought back, printed them in Japanese, traced the diagrams by hand. One booklet, still archived today in a museum in Yokohama, bears the title, Electric Honor, The Western Methods of Grooming. Author, Corporal Yuki Takamura. By the spring of that year, women were coming in too, not for shaves, but for the towels. They closed their eyes, breath deep. For 3 minutes in steam, there was peace. Takamura's shop opened officially in May of 1946. He called it Shiesvya, the House of Discipline and Cleanliness. The sign was hand-painted, lacquered by a retired carpenter who traded 2 eggs for a shave and a boiled towel. The floorboards were uneven. The window panes fogged easily. The steam kettle sat on a rusted stovetop fed with scraps of pine wood. But every morning at 6:00 a.m. the door unlocked. The towel steamed. The clippers hummed. And men came. Old men with ash in their beards, young men who had never known hot water, soldiers with missing fingers, teachers with hollow eyes. They came for 15 minutes of dignity. He didn't charge, not at first, not until the first school reopened down the street, not until the first postal worker asked if he had a monthly rate. It wasn't a business, it was a ritual. Like tea. Like bowing. Like the morning rain. Morita's shop opened 2 towns north, a quiet stall under a half-rebuilt train station. His first sign was stenciled onto a piece of cardboard. Haircuts, hot towels, respect. When he died in 1991, it was still there, framed, behind the glass of the modern storefront his son now runs. Fujikawa never cut hair again. He enrolled in university the moment the Americans allowed it. He studied physics, then electrical engineering. His thesis, written in 1949, focused on microvibration transfer in enclosed coil motors. The dedication on the first page read, "To the clippers that taught my hands the future." In 1952, a delegation of American businessmen visited Nagasaki on a tour of reconstruction sites. One of them, a man from Ohio, in a tan suit and wide tie, wandered into Shiesvya on accident, looking for a phone. He left with a shave and a photograph of the shop. That photo would later appear in a trade publication back in the States, with the caption, "Former enemy uses American clippers to rebuild industry and dignity." Takamura never saw it, but his daughter did. She keeps the magazine in a cloth sleeve to this day. The clippers lasted 24 years. He cleaned them every night, oiled the teeth, wrapped the cord, folded the towel carefully beneath them, even when the shelf was bare. They only failed once, during a blackout in '59. Even then, he did not cancel appointments. He used scissors. Boiled the towels. 2 men cried that day. Not because they were cut, but because they were reminded what it had been like before. In his final years, Takamura kept the old Oster tucked in a cedar box. The motor was rusted, the switch jammed, the teeth dulled. But he still took it out on Sundays, placed it on the counter. Like incense before a shrine. The war had taken everything from him, his rank, his sword, his homeland as he had known it. But in a camp far from home, surrounded by wire, his hands had touched something that changed him. Not through violence, through ritual. A machine handed to him by his enemy. A towel warmed by foreign heat. A razor guided not by hatred, but habit. He died in 1983. There was no monument. No medals. Just a worn wooden chair. A pair of calloused hands. And a drawer of tools that once shaved both captives and guards. They say that in his final days, when he could no longer speak, he would mime the shape of a towel, twist it in his palms, lay it gently across the lap of whoever sat near. The gesture always made them weep, because they understood what it meant. The war ended in fire, but for some, its echo came not through bombs, but steam, and the quiet buzz of a machine that once hummed in a camp built by strangers.